hopped over to the Woodlands Temple, our local synagogue, to participate in a clergy luncheon run. Because Ramadan is quickly approaching, our Muslim brethren shared about the 5 pillars of Islam, which includes not only the practices of prayer and pilgrimage that you may already be familiar with, but also their strong emphasis on fasting during that season. We learned much about how and why people of that faith fast. And the rabbis, too, were quick to jump in and make connections across our various faiths. But rather quickly, both of those groups realized that they knew very little about traditions of fasting in Christianity. So it was helpful that they asked me to prepare a synopsis in advance to share with them. I won't rehearse that whole presentation here, but I do want to share some insights with you as we begin to look forward to Ash Wednesday and the beginning of Lent. Moreover, seeing as it is a Communion Sunday, I think it's appropriate to spend just a little time thinking about what and how we Christians eat, how we consume. But perhaps surprisingly, the way I'd like to begin is by noting that from the beginning of our faith, we were characterized less by restriction, which is what we often think of when we think of fasting, right? Our faith was characterized less by restriction than it was by freedom, by liberation, by release. Now, certainly we recognize the full authority of the whole of the biblical text, including the law and the prophets. But significant portions of the New Testament and the teachings of Jesus are devoted to the guiding principle that the spirit of the law may be more important than the letter of the law. One example of this is found in 1 Corinthians 8, where the Apostle Paul is discussing whether or not his followers, this early community of Christians, whether they should consume meat that has been sacrificed to idols. Food will not bring us close to God, Paul writes. We are no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. But take care that this liberty of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. Within just these few sentences, Paul reorients us away from simple adherence to the rules, and instead toward a careful attention, a scrutiny of how our freedom, how our choices about what we will eat and do impact and affect other people, impact and affect the community. Suddenly, for Paul, the technicalities, the rules about whether or not this particular food that's been sacrificed to idols should be eaten, the whole conversation changes to, you are free to eat as you will, but take care how it will impact others. Now, early Christians did embrace practices of fasting, in particular through following through on the example of Christ's temptation in the wilderness. And eventually, in those early years, fasting became a core element of the preparation for baptism. And later it grew into a weekly communal practice observed on Wednesdays and Fridays to emulate those days when Jesus was betrayed and then crucified. But even as these practices of abstinence from food grew in importance as a ritual sign of inclusion in the community of faith, and also participation in the life, death, and resurrection of Christ, our fasting was still tied to the well-being of others. One of the early church fathers, the Archbishop John Chrysostom, who led the Christian community during the 4th century, had this to say about an expanded fasting practice. And listen closely to this. Let the hands fast, remaining clean from stealing and greediness. Let the legs fast, avoiding roads which lead to sinful sights. Let the eyes fast, by not fixing themselves on beautiful faces and by not observing the beauty of others. Let your hearing also fast. The fast of hearing is not to accept bad talk against others and sly defamations. Let the mouth fast from disgraceful and abusive words, because what gain is there when, on the one hand, we avoid eating chicken and fish, and on the other, we chew up and consume our brothers? Powerful. What gain is there to avoid eating chicken and fish or any other food you might imagine? What gain is there to avoid eating while we chew up and consume one another? It's the same structural argument that Paul offered in 1 Corinthians, what I already shared with you. Food will not bring us closer to God. Simply observing the form of the rule does us no good when, by action or inaction, we rain sorrow upon our neighbors. What is it good to follow the form of a rule when we are surrounded by misery? And this is also the same guiding principle that we've already heard this morning from the prophet Micah. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings? With calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? No! He has told you, mortal, what is good. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly? I don't need the extravagance. I simply need kindness. God doesn't desire wild sacrifices or acts of extraordinary piety. Rather, simply do justice and love kindness. Take care of one another. And this refrain is not constrained to Micah alone. In fact, we'll hear variations on this over the coming weeks and months as we move through Isaiah. Here's a foretaste from the 58th chapter. Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them and not to hide yourself from your own kin? Is this not the fast God chooses? Not simply to abstain from eating, but to set the oppressed free. Notice that the fast God chooses is not finally about withholding, but about rightly sharing among the people. And that brings us fittingly this morning to that table. Christian fasting, at its best, is never an end unto itself. It is not a hunger we cultivate for its own sake, out of a sense of self-righteousness. Rather, fasting clears space in our bodies, in our habits, in our desires, even our wallets, so that we might learn again what it means to receive rightly and to share justly. It's the same God who asks us to fast. It's the same God who offers us this feast. Just as we've heard from Isaiah and Micah, at this table we do not bring burnt offerings or rivers of oil. We don't bring extravagance. We don't seek to prove our worthiness through deprivation. Instead, we come with empty hands and often with empty hearts. And we receive, we're given bread. Bread that is shared, not hoarded. Bread, in fact, that comes to us already having been broken and shared among an entirely separate congregation of believers. We enjoy every month a sharing that goes already beyond the walls of this church. It's bread that teaches us that our lives are sustained not just by what we consume, but what we receive and share together as the community of faith. Fasting teaches us restraint, an important virtue. But communion teaches us generosity. And so, as we approach this table today, perhaps the question is not whether we have fasted well or will fast well in these coming weeks, but whether we are prepared to share in the just fruits of what we have received from God. Whether we will leave this place committed to sharing our bread with the hungry, to welcoming the stranger, and by spreading mercy, not only with one another, but with everyone, everywhere, that the light of God might touch. For this is the fast that God chooses, just as this is the feast that God provides. May it be so. Amen.